Hi, I'm Marin. My sister, my own blood, fired me in front of everyone at the company I helped build from scratch. No warning, no reason. Just a calm smile and a knife hidden behind it. But minutes later, her husband, my brother-in-law, stormed into her office and shouted, "You just cost us $90 million." That was the moment everyone turned silent. The moment they realized I wasn't disposable, I was the foundation she destroyed. And I still ask myself, was she always that cruel, or did I help her become it? Before we begin, where are you listening from right now? Drop a comment below. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's about the day silence learned how to fight back. The glass walls of the boardroom caught the sunlight just right that morning, throwing sharp reflections across the polished table. Chicago's skyline shimmered behind us, calm and oblivious. Inside, though, the air was thick enough to taste. I walked in with a cup of coffee still warm in my hand, the kind of comfort you cling to when you don't yet realize the day is about to break you. No one looked up when I entered, not a single one of them. The same people I'd worked alongside for 5 years, the ones I'd trained, supported, covered for. Their eyes stayed glued to their tablets, their laptops, their coffee mugs. I smiled, pretending not to notice, and took my usual seat at the far end of the table. My sister, Sable, sat at the head, wearing the confidence of someone who'd never had to earn it. The title of CEO still looked too new on her, like a tailored suit one size too big. Our father had stepped back just last month, calling it a semi-retirement, but everyone in this room knew he'd handed her the throne. That's how it always went in our family. Sable won. Always. I took a quiet sip of coffee, the kind of gesture that fills silence when you don't want to fill it with words. My heart wasn't racing yet. It should have been, but it wasn't. Maybe some part of me already knew. Sable cleared her throat, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "Let's begin," she said, her tone clipped, professional, cold. "We're restructuring operations." That word, restructuring, can gut a room faster than fire. She scrolled through a document on her tablet before glancing up, eyes scanning faces like a spotlight at an execution. "To align with our new strategic direction, some positions will be eliminated." Her gaze stopped on me. "Marin, your position is no longer necessary." The words dropped like a pin in a cathedral. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, watching, waiting to see how I'd fall apart. I looked around. No one met my eyes. Arlen, her husband, and conveniently, her new executive assistant, shifted uncomfortably beside her, lips pressed thin. He looked sorry, or maybe just nervous. My voice caught for a second before I steadied it. "Excuse me?" Sable leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "You've done great work, Marin, really, but we're moving in a new direction. I'll have HR reach out about your severance." That was it. No warning, no explanation, just an erasure. A few of the board members coughed, papers shuffled. Someone whispered something like "unfortunate," but no one stopped it. I'd seen men fired for incompetence get more dignity than this. I nodded slowly, the movement deliberate. "Understood." Sable smiled faintly, like she'd just checked something off her list. "If you're staying, at least make some coffee for the team." The words sliced through the air. Casual, cruel, rehearsed. She knew exactly what she was doing. I placed my name tag on the table. The small sound it made echoed louder than anything else in that room. My hands didn't shake, but my throat burned. Every instinct screamed to defend myself, to demand an explanation. But my father's voice came back to me steady as ever. "Never make noise when truth is on your side." So I didn't. I just stood up. I could feel every eye following me as I walked toward the glass door. My reflection ghosted alongside Sable's in the wall, her confident, mine hollow. We looked almost like twins, except she'd learned to smile through cruelty, and I'd learned to survive through silence. The hallway outside was cold and sterile. I didn't head straight for the elevator. I needed to breathe. My legs carried me toward the break room. Habit, I suppose? The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. A half-filled pot sat on the counter, steam still rising. Someone had poured themselves a cup and left it there. I stared at it for a moment. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Even the coffee here wasn't mine anymore. I picked up a paper cup, turned it in my hand, then put it back. For years, I'd poured myself into this company, into her vision, our father's legacy. I'd cleaned up Sable's mistakes, covered her absences, softened her edges for people who couldn't stand her, and she'd waited until she had the crown to cut me loose. It wasn't just business, it was blood. Walking toward the elevator, I felt a strange calm settle in. Not peace, something sharper. Focus. Maybe this was freedom wearing an ugly face. I thought of all the times I'd stayed quiet, all the times I'd let her talk over me, make me small. Maybe silence had always been my shield. Maybe now it would be my weapon. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside, watching the reflection of the office vanish as the doors slid shut. Down in the lobby, the receptionist gave me a sympathetic look, but said nothing. I nodded back, pushing through the revolving doors into the sunlight. The spring air hit me, cool, clean, almost mocking. Chicago was awake, unaware that my world had just tilted. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, just walked, one step at a time, the sound of my heels against the sidewalk like punctuation marks in a sentence I hadn't finished writing. She thought firing me would end the story. It only rewrote the beginning. That was the morning my sister burned her bridge, and I started building mine. That was the morning my sister burned her bridge, and I started building mine. By the time I made it home, the late afternoon sky had turned a dim, moody gray. The streets shimmered with puddles. Rain started tapping lightly on my apartment windows, a slow, steady rhythm, almost like someone whispering, "It's done." I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for a few seconds just stood there. Everything smelled the same. The faint scent of lemon from yesterday's dish soap, the faint musk of old wood floors. But I felt like a stranger in my own space. I didn't bother changing out of my work clothes. I kicked off my heels, dropped my bag on the counter, and sank into the old armchair by the window. My reflection in the glass looked drained, not just tired, emptied. You know that feeling after a tornado has passed, but before you realize the house is gone? That's what this was. I kept replaying the scene in my head, Sable's voice, flat and surgical. Her eyes didn't flicker. That wasn't a decision made in the moment. No, she'd planned it, maybe rehearsed it. That wasn't about restructuring. That was about erasing me, publicly, cleanly. Not because I wasn't doing my job, but because I was too close, too involved, too trusted by people she wanted to control. And I was stupid enough to believe blood would keep me safe. My phone buzzed beside me, lighting up the darkened room. 37 missed messages. Some from colleagues. Short, awkward. Didn't see that coming. Thinking of you. Hope you're okay. None brave enough to ask what really happened. And then, one from my father. Just 2 words. Call me. No punctuation, no warmth. I stared at it for a long time before locking the screen again. He knew. Of course he did. He probably didn't even argue. Maybe he thought she'd finally grown into leadership. Or maybe he just didn't want to get involved. My mother hadn't sent anything. I wasn't surprised. Then there was the voicemail from Sable. I didn't want to hear it, but I pressed play anyway. Hey, I know this probably feels personal, but let's not make this dramatic. It's just business. That phrase hit me harder than the firing. It's just business. She used to say that when she was younger, anytime she crossed a line, cheated in a board game, lied to cover herself, I'd always let it go. It's just business was her excuse for every betrayal, big or small. And now she'd used it again to cleanly cut me out of a company I helped hold together. Like I was a line item on a spreadsheet she didn't want to justify anymore. I stood up too fast, the rage rising before I could control it. I opened my purse, searching for something, anything, and my fingers brushed metal, my old name tag. Operations Director, Marin Pierce. It was slightly bent, probably from being shoved in carelessly this morning. But there it was, proof that I had existed inside that company, that I wasn't imagining the 5 years of silent effort, sleepless nights, or the messes I'd cleaned up for her. I placed it gently on the kitchen counter. It looked so small, but somehow heavier than the laptop sitting beside it. I ran my hand over the surface. A title, a role, a lifetime, gone. 2 weeks ago, she came into my office, all smiles and charm. Said she needed me to sign a procedural update for real estate reporting. Said it was about streamlining the approval process. I was buried under deadlines. I didn't ask too many questions. I signed it. I remember now, her eyes flickered. Just a split second. I'd unknowingly signed away my oversight rights. She'd carved out my part of the company, the part I knew best, and boxed it up under her name. The firing wasn't spontaneous. It was a slow, careful setup. I turned toward the window. The rain had picked up, harder now. The city lights below flickered like a warning. My hands curled into fists before I even realized it. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about truth, about dignity. I didn't want to scream or cry. I wanted her to feel it, slowly, the same way I had. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Not to scroll through job listings. I didn't want a new job. I wanted the truth. And if she wanted a war in silence, she just picked the wrong soldier. I logged into Pierce Holdings' digital archives. Access still active for now. One search bar. Thousands of files. I started typing. That night, I didn't sleep. I started digging. And what I found made the firing look like a cover-up. The glow from my laptop was still on when the morning light broke through the blinds. I hadn't moved from the chair since the night before. My back ached. My fingers had cramped hours ago. But the cold knot of clarity in my stomach kept me alert. What I'd found, it wasn't just backstabbing, it was calculated theft, and maybe more. I showered without thinking, threw on black slacks and a plain blouse. Same style I'd worn every Tuesday for the last 5 years. My badge was still clipped to my purse. No one had revoked it yet. That told me Sable believed I'd disappear quietly. I stepped out just after 6. The air was cool and damp. The sidewalk still darkened from last night's rain. Chicago moved like it always did. Horns, heels, murmured curses between crosswalks. But my feet had a new rhythm. I wasn't going back as an employee. I was returning as a witness. At 7:02 a.m., I walked into the lobby of Pierce Holdings. The security guard, Larry, looked up, paused, then gave a stiff nod. "Morning, Miss Pierce," he said, almost like muscle memory. He glanced at the screen in front of him. I held up my badge, and when the scanner lit green, he didn't stop me. I didn't smile, just kept walking. The receptionist at the front desk, Haley, fresh out of college, all fake lashes and LinkedIn ambition, went suddenly quiet. She gave me a barely there nod, like I was a ghost, and fumbled with her mouse. Let her talk. Let them all talk. I rode the elevator up to floor 22. My floor, my old floor. The doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped out into the hush of early morning, the hum of servers behind the wall, the soft clack of someone typing far down the hall. I turned toward my old office. The nameplate was gone. Inside, the lights were off, furniture rearranged. Empty shelves, no sign of me. It was like I'd been scrubbed out, not just fired, but erased. I stood there for a second, staring into that blank space, until a flicker of movement caught my eye across the hall. Sable. In her office. Through the glass, she was seated at the head of the table, animated, gesturing to a screen. Her expression was confident. Too confident. I knew that look. It was her favorite version of herself, in control, admired, untouchable. But something else held my attention. On the desk behind her, fanned out like a presentation, were printouts of the River North expansion. Contracts, architectural plans, acquisition memos. I recognized the formatting instantly. They were mine. Every paragraph, every layout, every strategic note. I had spent 3 months assembling that plan. And right there, on the header of the top document, Sable Pierce, project lead. My hands went cold. She hadn't just fired me. She was parading around wearing my work like a designer coat. And everyone in that glass room was nodding along. I backed away from the window and made my way to the communal archive room. My keycard still worked. I slid in, sat at one of the terminals, and logged into the shared drive. No alerts, still live. She really thought I wouldn't fight. I typed fast, scanning folders, opening project files, tracking document edits. Then I found it, the original acquisition contract for the River North property. The metadata still had my name as author, but the final version, the one filed, had a new name digitally stamped in, hers. The signature line had been altered, not erased, just overlaid. A forgery, neat, professional, and absolutely illegal. My stomach tightened. I leaned back, blinking. There it was, the proof. I downloaded it onto a portable drive I always kept in my purse. The same one I used for off-site backups back when the system went down last year. Funny how little habits save you. As I stood, the door creaked. Hey! I turned. Ellen Ward, HR director, early 50s, wore her reading glasses low and her judgment lower. But today, her tone was softer. "Didn't expect to see you," she said, glancing down the hallway. I didn't answer. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. "You didn't hear this from me," she murmured, "but someone's been moving funds. Company accounts, shell transactions, all hush-hush. Started just after you signed that update contract 2 weeks ago." My breath caught. "Where'd you hear that?" I asked. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter, just be careful." And just like that, she walked out. I stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering. There it was, a thread, a link between my removal and something much bigger. Maybe Sable didn't just want credit. Maybe she needed me out of the way. I made my way back to the elevator, trying to keep my face neutral. On the ground floor, I paused at the front doors. Morning sun reflected off the glass like a mirror. Yesterday, I saw shame. Today, I saw something else. Focus, precision. A woman who knew where she stood and what had been stolen from her. She stole my name once. She won't do it twice. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me. She was hiding something that could destroy the entire company. The office was humming before I even walked in. 3 days had passed since I last stepped foot inside Pierce Holdings, and I could already feel the shift. The tension wasn't loud. It was quiet, poisonous, like perfume in the air you didn't notice until it clung to your clothes. Elevators dinged, heels clicked, phones rang, but conversations stopped when I passed. Eyes flicked up and quickly down again. No one said anything. No one had to. I checked my phone. The first message had come in at 9:02 a.m. Hey, I don't want to believe the rumors, but are the fraud accusations true? I didn't respond. What was there to say? By noon, there were 5 more just like it. Some politely worded, others not so much. And then the kicker, a push notification from a finance blog I used to admire, Pierce Holdings under scrutiny, insider fired amidst compliance scandal. I stood frozen by the vending machine. I hadn't even gotten coffee yet. It didn't say my name outright, but it didn't have to. They'd used my initials, my division, the timing, and that one word, violation. I took a slow breath and turned to head back to the elevator, deciding whether to confront it head-on or let it burn out on its own, when Ellen caught up with me in the hallway. "Don't say anything right now," she murmured, her voice low but urgent. "Just walk with me." We took the back stairs up to the HR floor. She kept checking over her shoulder like we were part of some spy movie, but I didn't blame her. It already felt like we were being watched. Ellen wasn't the dramatic type, but today she had that look in her eye, like she'd seen too much. When we reached her office, she closed the door and pulled the blinds. "There was a leak," she said. "Sable's team released a statement to the press. They're saying you were let go for internal discrepancies in project reporting. Off the record, of course, no names, just enough to make it sound credible." My mouth went dry. So this was the plan all along? Ellen didn't answer right away. She just gave me that look, apologetic, tired, frustrated. "She's not just trying to ruin your reputation, Marin. She's trying to erase it." I nodded, but something inside me had already gone quiet, numb. I wasn't angry yet, not the way I'd been before. This wasn't a firestorm anymore. This was erosion, slow, quiet, dangerous. I left Ellen's office without saying much else. I needed air, something solid beneath my feet. The coffee shop across the street felt like neutral ground. I'd sat there hundreds of times before. Early mornings, late nights, conference calls on mute, writing performance reviews or project budgets while the city moved around me. But today, I just stared at my reflection in the coffee's surface. The waitress walked over with the pot and gave me a sideways glance. "You look like someone who just got blamed for someone else's mess." I let out the smallest laugh. "You have no idea," she poured. "They never see it coming, do they?" "No," I said. "They don't." I stirred the coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl in, the chaos softening into something calm. That was the thing about storms. Eventually, they either passed or turned into something worse. I sat there longer than I should have, not hiding exactly, but retreating, pulling back to see the bigger picture, the pattern. Then I opened my laptop, not to respond to messages, not to defend myself, to map it. I started with everything I could remember: projects, transfers, contracts. Who touched what? When? Where things had gone sideways. And that's when I saw it. A name I hadn't noticed before, buried deep in a minor real estate acquisition. A name that didn't belong on the vendor list, Marrow Investments. It showed up again in another deal, and again in a consulting payment from 6 months ago. I checked the vendor file. No website, no address, no LinkedIn page. Just a P.O. box in Nevada. Someone had gone out of their way to hide it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't even about me. This was bigger, messier. I barely heard my phone buzz. It was Ellen again. She met me outside the office building, her coat still on, like she hadn't even stopped walking from her car. She held out an envelope, plain white, unmarked. "I shouldn't have this," she said quickly, "but you need to see it." Inside were 3 printed pages: system access logs, export history, file edits. Sable's account had been used to modify old project archives. Ones I'd worked on, ones with my name on them. They weren't just deleting me from the company. They were rewriting the story from the inside. I looked up at Ellen. She shook her head. Be careful. You're not just stepping on toes anymore. I folded the envelope, tucked it into my coat, and walked away without another word. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter, laptop open, heart steady, and I typed one line, just one. I sent it directly to Sable. You might want to check the audit trail. I didn't expect the call to come that early. The light had barely filtered through the blinds in my apartment. Outside, the city was waking up. Horns, footsteps, a garbage truck grumbling past. But inside, everything felt still. I was standing in the kitchen with my mug half full, staring at nothing in particular, when the phone rang. Not a number I recognized. Not a number that needed to be recognized. I answered without saying a word. Marin. Sable's voice slid in, crisp, clean, and just controlled enough to let me know she was furious. You've made a mistake. I waited. Let the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel it. She continued, her tone sharpening. The company will pursue legal action if you don't delete what you stole. Still, I said nothing. Just let her voice hang in the air like a thread pulled too tight. Then I replied, soft but steady. Funny, that's exactly what I was going to say. There was a beat, a long one, and then, muffled in the background, I heard Arlen. His voice wasn't meant for me, but it wasn't fully hidden either. Let her talk, Sable. You're making this worse. She snapped instantly. Stay out of it. It wasn't just the words. It was the crack in her voice. The first one I'd heard in years. I almost smiled. Almost. She ended the call without another word. I stood there for a while after the line went dead, letting the stillness return. My fingers curled around the warm ceramic of the mug again, grounding me. I poured the rest of the coffee slowly, deliberately, like the simple act itself held weight. It did now. It had once been a symbol of humiliation, of servitude, of being told in front of a full boardroom that my value had boiled down to brewing a pot. Not anymore. I stirred in a touch of cream, no sugar, just enough to shift the color. You used to drink yours black, I murmured into the silence. Now it's full of sugar and lies. The bitterness on my tongue didn't come from the coffee. Later that morning, the sun had risen higher, casting sharper light through my window. I had folders spread out across the dining table, digital and printed. My laptop buzzed with half-finished spreadsheets and file names that had started to feel like puzzle pieces I'd stared at too long. The phone rang again. Ellen. Her voice was low, urgent. I checked the audit trail. 2 key transactions were deleted the day after your firing. I froze. Deleted? Wiped, she confirmed, but not cleanly. There's a shadow entry, like someone tried to scrub it, but the timestamp stayed behind. Which projects? I already knew. Both tied to that shell company, Marrow Investments. That name again. It kept circling, like a storm refusing to move on. I'm printing everything I can get before they shut down access, she added, if they haven't already. Forward what you can, I said. We hung up without goodbye. There wasn't space for pleasantries anymore, just facts, timelines, and the slow burn of knowing. I gathered the pages I'd printed so far, half-formed contracts, altered PDFs, project logs with my initials missing, my edits erased, my name replaced. It wasn't the full picture, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to rattle someone who thought no one was watching. I sat back, exhaled, and let my gaze drift out the window. The skyline stretched across the distance, clean and sharp against the sky. It always looked peaceful from a distance, as if the city weren't full of teeth and glass and whispered wars behind every elevator door. I remembered something my father used to say when I was younger and too idealistic for my own good. Integrity over power, Marin. Always. It had sounded noble then, heavy with meaning. But now it sounded incomplete. I whispered to the glass, to no one, to everyone who'd underestimated me. What if I need both? Because maybe that's what it took now. Not choosing between doing right and holding power, but knowing when to use one to protect the other. And maybe that's what this war was really about. That afternoon, I walked back into the building, not as an employee, but as her reckoning. 2 weeks passed, but the air inside that building hadn't changed. Still too clean, still too quiet. Like it wanted you to feel small the second you stepped inside. But I didn't walk in like a woman looking for permission anymore. Security looked up the moment I came through the doors. My ID card had stopped working days ago, a formality Sable made sure was handled without ceremony. But power didn't sit in a badge. It walked in silence, wore steadiness like steel. One of the guards moved toward me, uncertain. "Ms. Pierce, we're going to have to." I cut in gently. "You can call her. She'll want to see me." I didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. The guard looked at his colleague, then back at me. Hesitated. I stepped forward. They didn't stop me. My heels hit the floor with just enough echo to remind them, and myself, I'd built this hallway. Every inch of it. I didn't need a badge to belong. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was quiet. I didn't check my phone. I didn't touch the folder tucked under my arm. Inside were names, numbers, account codes, enough proof to light the match I'd been waiting to strike. Outside the glass doors of the boardroom, I paused just long enough to hear the tail end of Sable's voice. Which is why this quarter's forecast shows a 17% improvement from our earlier projection. It's a result of tightening compliance and... I opened the door. Every head turned. Except hers, not immediately. She paused, not long. Just a flicker of hesitation, like a screen glitching for half a second before the image returned. Then her eyes met mine. Cool, calculated. I smiled as I walked in. "I believe you're discussing my department's figures," I said, placing the folder in front of the board members without so much as a glance at her. The room froze, just like I expected. Sable's chair creaked as she stood. "You don't belong here, Marin. This meeting is confidential." I nodded slightly. "Right, just like the fund transfers tied to your signature." I flipped the folder open with a calm hand, revealing the first page, a transfer, then another. All routed through Marrow Investments, all linked back to her. No one spoke. Sable's eyes darted to the page, then to the board members, then back to me. "That's confidential information, Marin. You're trespassing." I looked up at her, steady. "So is forging a signature." The air in the room tightened. No raised voices, no slammed fists. Just silence, heavy enough to feel physical. I let the moment stretch. Across the table, Arlen shifted. His jaw clenched. His fingers tapped once, then stopped. He wasn't looking at her anymore, not even pretending. He looked at me, and that was louder than any outburst. Sable tried to recover. "These documents aren't verified. Anyone can manipulate." Arlen cut in, quiet but clear. "They're real." Her neck snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" He didn't backpedal, didn't blink. "I saw the originals. I handled the scans. They weren't supposed to be processed through Marrow." It was a whisper of mutiny, but it echoed like thunder. I didn't stay long after that. I didn't need to. The folder was in their hands now. The truth, no matter how carefully hidden, had its scent in the air. The kind you couldn't wash out. As I walked back down the hall, past familiar offices, names on doors, the same old potted plants I used to walk by daily, I didn't stop. Not until I reached the empty desk near the end. My old desk. The nameplate was still gone. No trace of me left, but I didn't feel erased. I let my fingers brush the wood surface gently. No need to stay. No need to reclaim what I'd already outgrown. She took my name off the door, I whispered, but not out of the story. The words felt final, not an end, but a turning. That evening, her secretary, my brother-in-law, came to my apartment, holding an envelope that would change everything. The rain hadn't stopped since late afternoon. By the time night settled, the city outside my apartment was nothing but streaks of silver light and wet reflections. I hadn't turned on any lamps. The glow from the kitchen clock and the hum of the refrigerator were enough. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. When the knock came, it wasn't loud. Just 3 sharp taps, spaced too evenly to be accidental. I already knew who it was. I opened the door to find Arlen standing there, rain dripping from his coat, an envelope pressed flat in his trembling hands. His tie was crooked, and his eyes looked older than they had 2 weeks ago. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked before the words formed. "I shouldn't be here," he said finally. "You already are," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in before you drown out there." He hesitated, then walked in slowly, leaving a small trail of rainwater across the floor. He didn't sit right away, just stood there, holding the envelope like it might burn through his fingers. The silence stretched, broken only by the low hum of the fridge. I watched him, waiting. I didn't ask questions anymore. I'd learned that silence can make people tell you more than you'd ever get by asking. Finally, he lowered himself into the chair across from me, set the envelope on the table, and ran both hands through his hair. "She told me to erase the audit trail," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Right after the transfers cleared." I leaned back, keeping my tone even. "She told you, or she ordered you?" He laughed once without humor. "You think there's a difference when Sable gives an order?" I didn't answer. He already knew. He stared at the envelope like it held something radioactive. I did what she asked. I wiped everything, every log, every trace. But then, she moved the money again. Offshore this time. I didn't flinch. "Offshore where?" He swallowed hard. "Cayman accounts. She's been funneling money through shell companies tied to real estate developments, all under the name Marrow Investments." My pulse slowed, not sped up. I'd expected this, maybe not the scale, but the shape of the truth had always been there, just waiting to surface. "So it wasn't just about me," I said softly. He looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. "No, you were just the liability she needed gone. You caught the first inconsistencies, remember? She couldn't risk you digging deeper." He opened the envelope and slid its contents toward me. Several USB drives, a few printed screenshots, pages of transaction records with her digital signature repeated over and over. "She made me believe it was to protect the company," he said, "but it was her. It's always been her." I studied the papers without touching them. The neat precision of Sable's lies was almost beautiful in its structure. Every number, every signature, every falsified timestamp. She hadn't just bent the truth, she'd engineered it. "Do you have backups of these?" I asked. He nodded. "One copy's with me, the others are stored remotely. I couldn't destroy all of it." "Good," I said simply. "That means it's not just your conscience keeping you alive." He exhaled, shaking his head. "She'll come after me for this. She'll know I talked." "She already knows," I said. "She always does." He pressed his palms to his face. "I thought I was protecting her, Marin, protecting the company. But she's become someone I don't recognize anymore." I watched him carefully. His guilt wasn't performative. It was the kind that lives under your skin, that gnaws instead of bursts. He wasn't the enemy, not tonight. "She didn't become that," I said quietly. "She always was. You just stopped pretending." He looked up at me, eyes glassy. "You sound like you've known all along." "I did," I said. "I just wanted to believe she could be better." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock filled the space between us, counting down to something neither of us could avoid. He finally slid one of the USB drives across the table. "Everything you need to prove it is on there. Every move she made, every false account." I picked it up and held it in my hand. Small, unassuming, yet heavier than any evidence I'd ever seen. Proof wasn't loud. It was quiet, like this, cold, sharp, final. He let out a shaky breath. "She'll ruin me for this." I looked at him evenly. "She already did." He nodded once, as if those words landed where they were supposed to. Then he leaned back, eyes closed. "You're not afraid of her anymore, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm past fear. I'm just tired of letting her write the story." The rain outside had softened into a steady rhythm against the glass. I walked to the window and looked out, the city shimmering beneath the storm. My reflection stared back at me, older, calmer, sharper. The last time I'd seen myself like this, it had been in the mirrored doors of the office lobby, walking out in humiliation. Now, the reflection didn't look broken. It looked ready. "She took everything," Arlen said behind me, voice hoarse. "The company, my marriage, my life. What's left for her to lose?" I turned slightly, still watching the rain slide down the glass. "The lie," he frowned. "You're going to expose her." "I'm going to end it," I said. "Tomorrow." His voice cracked. "She'll destroy you." I faced him fully then. "She already tried." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was focused, alive, purposeful. He pushed his chair back slowly. "What do you want me to do?" I picked up the envelope again and placed it back in his hands. "Come with me tomorrow. We'll do it the right way." His fingers trembled as he gripped it. "She won't forgive me." "She never forgave anyone," I said. "Not even herself." He stood, still shaking. For a moment, I saw the man he used to be, the loyal brother-in-law, the eager assistant, the man who thought good intentions could outlast power. He wasn't that anymore, neither was I. When he reached the door, I stopped him. "Arlen." He turned, uncertain. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Boardroom, 9 o'clock. Bring the drives. Don't be late." He nodded once, a silent promise, then left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind him felt final, like the first drop of a long-awaited storm. I turned back toward the window. My reflection waited there still, not the face of defeat anymore, but of endurance. The kind forged in silence, polished by betrayal. I whispered to my own shadow, "You survived her once. Now you finish it." Outside, the rain began again, harder this time. And as I stood there, the USB drive still warm in my hand, I knew. This wasn't the end of Sable Pierce's story. It was the end of her control over mine. The next morning, I walked into that boardroom one last time. Not as her sister, but as the evidence she couldn't erase. And now, a week later, I was walking back in, with everyone else watching. The air in the boardroom felt strangely heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. It wasn't just the usual quarterly tension. This morning carried something unspoken, a quiet knowing that whatever was about to happen couldn't be undone. I entered through the main hallway. My heels tapped against the marble floor in sync with Arlen's slower, almost hesitant steps behind me. He carried a dark leather briefcase close to his side, like it might shatter if he let it go. Sable was already seated, of course, always early when it served her image. She sat at the head of the table, dressed in a steel gray suit, the kind that dared anyone to question her authority. Her arms were crossed and her chin was slightly lifted, the posture of someone still pretending they were in control. "You're not supposed to be here," she said sharply, voice cutting through the silence like glass. I looked directly at her. "Neither are you." The stillness that followed was thick. Even the board members, some of whom had worked alongside my father since the beginning, looked between us like they just realized they were no longer bystanders. I walked to the far end of the table, laid my folder down, and nodded once at Arlen. He reached into the briefcase, pulled out a laptop and flash drive, then passed them to me with a quiet breath. "I hope you're not planning a tantrum," Sable said. "We have actual business to handle." "I agree," I said, turning on the projector. "Let's handle it." The screen lit up. At first, just a dashboard, clean, orderly, familiar to anyone in that room. But then, I opened the audit trail. Over the last 6 months, funds from our joint projects were redirected into accounts not tied to Pierce Holdings. I began. My voice was calm, measured. These accounts belong to Marrow Investments, a company established under Sable Pierce 8 months before she assumed the CEO position. A low murmur rippled around the table. Someone shifted in their chair. One of the newer board members leaned forward, squinting. I clicked again. Transaction records appeared, clear, time-stamped, signed. "These signatures," I continued, "are digitally verified. Every single one traces back to your login credentials, Sable." Her hands didn't move, but her eyes flicked briefly toward Arlen. It was enough. The board saw it. The betrayal had a scent, and she reeked of it. "You think they'll believe a fired employee and a desperate man?" she said, voice rising, almost laughing. But there was no humor, just the sound of someone slipping. "No," I replied, eyes on her. "I think they'll believe the system you forgot to scrub." I clicked play. A screen recording rolled, showing her login, her access, her movements, her digital fingerprint across every manipulated line item. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It roared. Even the walls knew this was the end. Her voice broke. "This is all circumstantial." Before she could finish, Arlen stood, pale but firm, and placed his written statement on the table. "I was there," he said, eyes cast downward. "I helped cover it. I thought I was protecting the company. I was wrong." The board chair, a man named Reynolds who'd served under my father for 3 decades, looked from Arlen to me. Then he turned to the man seated 2 spots down, my father. Harlan Pierce hadn't spoken yet, but now he stood slowly. His face was older than I remembered, not just with time, but with disappointment. His hands, still steady, rested on the table as he looked at his eldest daughter. "You used this company," he said softly. "Your family, your name, not to protect it, but to feed your pride." Sable's mask finally cracked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her eyes darted, desperate, searching for a crack in the wall, a way out, but there wasn't one. "You're finished," he said. And with those words, the power shifted and never returned. The room stayed quiet. No applause, no rage. Just the sound of something massive collapsing in silence. A janitor, unaware of the weight that had just settled in that room, entered to clear the empty coffee cups and discarded papers. In the shuffle, 1 cup tipped. Black coffee spilled across the table, spreading across a termination letter that had been quietly printed and signed. The janitor apologized softly and began to mop it up. I watched it for a long moment. "You said it was just business," I whispered, not looking at her. "Now it finally is." Security arrived, not with force, but with formality. Sable stood, stiff, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. As they escorted her out, I didn't follow her with my eyes, not because I didn't care, but because I was done. I looked back at the boardroom, the same room where I'd once been silenced, accused, erased. Now, no one said a word, but their silence spoke volumes. They'd seen what needed to be seen, and I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard anymore. That night, I didn't celebrate. I sat alone, realizing victory doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes it just feels quiet. A week passed, not rushed, not slow, just passing. Late afternoon light poured in through the wide windows of the building I once walked into every morning with coffee in one hand and 100 thoughts in the other. Today, though, I wasn't rushing to beat the clock or dodging glances. I took my time. My shoes made soft taps across the marble floor as I walked through the lobby, a place that once felt cold, now simply felt still. They'd replaced the nameplate outside my old office. Just a generic brass strip now, waiting for the next ambitious name to be engraved. They replaced the nameplate already, I said, half to myself. Ellen stood beside me, arms folded gently, the same soft smile she always wore. Equal parts compassion and endurance. New names come and go, she said, but everyone here remembers yours. Her voice didn't carry pity, just truth. We kept walking, past the receptionist who offered a subtle nod, down the hallway I'd once been led out of with silence louder than shouting. Now it echoed with familiarity, not shame. I stepped inside what used to be my office. Nothing had really changed. The same desk, the same dull art on the walls. Yet it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. And that felt okay. A knock on the door. My father entered quietly, wearing the navy sweater he always wore on hard days. He didn't ask if he could sit, just did. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing him without the armor of legacy I'd wrapped him in for so long. "I should have seen what she was doing," he said, voice worn thin. "I should have stopped it." I leaned back in the chair, fingers resting on the armrest. "You saw what you wanted to see. That's what love does to parents. It edits the truth." He let out a breath, slow and deep. "You sound like your mother." That caught me. He never talked about her much. "She never fought loud either," he added, "but she always won." We sat in silence, not awkward, not heavy, just mutual understanding settling into the space between us. After he left, I turned back to the desk. There wasn't much to clear out. I'd taken what mattered already. But in the back drawer, taped under a stack of untouched envelopes, I found something small. My name tag. The one I'd clutched in the parking garage the day they fired me. Someone, maybe Ellen, had returned it quietly. I ran my fingers across the letters. Marin Pierce. It used to feel like proof of worth. Now it just felt like old skin. I smiled faintly and dropped it into the trash. I didn't need a name on a door to know who I was anymore. Later, I found myself standing in the restroom, the one with the mirror that used to mock me. I remembered watching Sable adjust her blazer there, fixing her lipstick like she was preparing for war. That day, she fired me. She looked past me in that mirror like I wasn't even real. Now, I stood alone, staring at my own reflection. No panic in my chest, no second guessing, just me, whole, present. "I walked in as her sister," I whispered to the woman in the glass. "I walk out as myself." I left the restroom, walked through the halls one last time, and stepped outside. The late sun dipped low, casting gold across the sidewalk. Ellen stood near the edge of the curb, arms crossed, eyes warm. "So, what's next?" she asked. I looked up, letting the breeze move through me. "A new chapter," I said, "but this time I'll write it myself." We smiled at each other, not a goodbye, just a shared knowing, and I turned toward the street. The glass facade of the building reflected the city skyline behind me. But for once, I didn't feel small in its shadow. I didn't feel erased. I felt returned. The door closed softly behind me. No bang, no applause, just peace. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. It's the sound of the door closing behind you, and realizing you'll never need to knock again. And maybe one day, when she looks back, she'll understand that I never wanted to win. I just wanted to stop losing myself.